I guess the added benefit is we can take this class over again. So fun. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. So we're going to start off as we normally do in our meditation. So just take a moment to find a comfortable position for your body. We'll be here for about 5 minutes, so just allow any movement or shifts or propping of your body so that you really feel like you can settle in. And just like we play the edge physically within our bodies when we move into the postural aspect, please don't make yourself stay in whatever position that you are in if it's extremely uncomfortable. And so you might begin to close the eyes or just gaze softly either towards the ceiling or out in front of you. And just taking a moment to allow this vision to become a bit more internal. So just checking in with the internal landscape and scanning through the body and just observing how you feel this afternoon. And as you scan through the body, you might take a moment to check in with the emotional or the energetic body. And so this tuning in, this checking in really isn't a ranking or a judgment on whatever is there. It's just using it as wisdom as we move forth in our practice this afternoon. And breath can be however it feels best, whether it's more focused and concentrated or just your natural breath. And if you have a preferred meditation practice that you like, you're more than welcome to settle into that. And I'll just begin with a brief guidance on a yin approach to meditation. And so just noting where either the hands are touching the body or the floor, or perhaps just feeling where your body is touching any material or support beneath you. And let this be a place to come back to at any point. Think of it as a perch for your attention to rest upon. And then from that place, just setting the gentle intention to be open and receptive to whatever experience that you might have within your meditation or even within your physical practice. So opening up to this cultivation of yin qualities towards body and mind, an allowance, a tolerance, and some kindness and compassion. And resisting the urge to direct the attention in any way, unless you find yourself with some stronger energies. In which case you can give yourself permission to return back to that perch. And we'll take a few moments in silence, and I'll guide you out when that time comes. slowly start to bring that attention back towards your perch. If there are any other dedications that you would like to make towards your practice, you could place that within the forefront of the mind to come back to. And slowly blinking the eyes open if they were closed, and just moving gently into the body again. And as we gradually shift from our meditation, just starting to open up to this slowing down within our practice. And so if you're lying down on your back, just making your way back up towards a seated position, and then we'll eventually shift over to our hands and knees. If you have a blanket with you, I would suggest unfolding it and placing it on your mat so that the edges spill off of the sides. And if you don't have a blanket, you might want to take these first few postures facing towards the long edge of your mat. Just an option depending on how sensitive your knees feel on connection with the floor. All right. So from our hands and knees, we're going to begin to bring some attention to the inner thighs, coming into our wide-kneed child's pose, or what we call tadpole in our yin yoga practice. So just taking the knees out a bit wider, and you might angle the shins slightly inward, toes might be touching, there might be space between them. And then slowly start to shift in towards this posture until you start to feel sensation within the inner thighs. And that might mean that the hips are still lifted from the heels. And once you feel that sensation, just slowly start to release the upper body down towards the floor. But know that you can also bring the floor to meet your body. So you might bring your forehead to a block or stacked palms. If you have a pillow with you or an extra blanket, that could also perhaps suffice as well. And as we settle into this first posture, I'll just go over the main principles of the practice of yin yoga. And so this is a tissue-specific practice where we're aiming to begin to stimulate and gently stress the denser connective tissues of our body. So this includes our fascia, our joint capsules, our ligaments and our tendons. And though some of the sensation might be felt within the body of our muscle, it's just important to note that our fascia really is everywhere at different depths and layers surrounding the bundles of muscle fibers. And so less is really more within this practice. We hold postures for anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. And so in order to hold them without straining too much, ideally we would really like to have sensation to be more in the mild to moderate range as we hold the posture. Softening into the muscles where you feel sensation, and they might be in one or all of those target areas listed. They might shift and change over the course of the hold of the posture, and they might build in intensity or lessen. And that's when you, the practitioner, can decide if I should bring my knees closer together or wider apart. If there's any sharp sensation or numbness or tingling, all signs to back out of the pose. You might eventually re-enter the pose or just pause and wait until the next posture is called. And so those are the key magic ingredients to start to play the edge of resistance and sensation in the body, knowing that we'll all look a bit different. which really emphasizes our unique skeletal structure, our unique tension patterns, and the unique variabilities that we get to explore within this practice. And softening the muscles where we feel sensation helps to then transfer that stress. And then the other magic ingredient is time. And so if we're new to the practice, or it's been a while since we've practiced, it may not feel right in your body to hold for that length of time. So really it shows that you're a wise practitioner if you adjust, if you back out, if you continue to listen to your body. We'll be here for about 30 more seconds. And so just like in our meditation practice, the breath could be more focused and directed. It could just be the natural pace of our breath. All right. And then we'll slowly start to back out of this posture towards our hands and knees. Taking your time to get there and just being aware that it might be a little bit tender, fragile, or delicate within the inner thighs or the outer hips, perhaps the spine or the shoulders. And so from here, we'll continue to target within the inner groin, beginning to shift towards our frog pose. So starting with our hips about stacked over the knees, begin to send the knees away from one another. So if you don't have a blanket here, it might be nice to just turn to face the long edge of your mat. There might be a little bit of pressure on the inner line of the knees, and that's okay as long as it's not painful. Shins might still be angled in, they might be back behind the knees, toes could face towards the back of the room or out towards the long edge of the mat. And you might stay with your arms straight for a period of time. You might also explore shifting your hips slightly forward of the knees or slightly back, and noticing how that changes sensation within the inner lines of the legs. Others may find it more suitable to release the forearms down to the support of blocks or the floor. If you have a bolster pillow, it might be underneath the chest for a place to rest here as well. And if you're down on your forearms and you've got a block, you might just place a block underneath your forehead just to encourage that sense of surrender where we're not targeting. And as we hold here, you might notice that the knees just slowly drift away as tension starts to dissipate, meaning the sensation is less strong and the tissues just naturally start to release. Notice if you're gripping in the belly at all or within the face. I always like to pay attention to the breath. If it becomes choppy or erratic, it could mean that you're just too deep within the posture. Try backing off and taking your time to ease into the pose. And for some, there might be this sense of compression that could be felt at the back of the hips, into the sacrum perhaps. So just really finding that just right edge of sensation to pause and linger here. about a minute left. And so in this practice, we're aiming to maintain the health of these tissues and the joints. Naturally, as we age, we start to lose mobility. These tissues just naturally become a bit denser and more brittle. And so it's through this stimulation that we rehydrate. We might find ourselves returning back to a range of motion that we had in our younger years. Okay, so from here, we're just going to make this gradual progression towards a posture called bullfrog. And this might require a little bit of finagling. So we'll slowly start to shift our pelvis towards the floor, and as you do so, allow your shins to lift with that movement. So this gets a little bit deeper into that inner line of the legs. And so if you find that it's not comfortable to have the feet touching towards one another, or there's just this strain to keep it there, you could start to release and straighten into the legs. You might bring the legs closer towards one another. And it's almost like we're in this sphinx-like posture. But if this is too much for the low back, you could certainly walk the elbows forward or come to stack forearms or palms and rest the forehead here as well. So lots of different target areas, whether it's your low back, deeper into the inner groin. I find I feel sensation along that outer rim of my outside of my hips too. And so at any point you could start to straighten into the legs if this doesn't feel suitable. Nice. You might find that you just hook one foot on top of the other. And so for those that are newer to this practice, it's really quite wonderful at developing a meditation practice. Each time we enter a posture, it's just that opportunity to have almost a mini meditation session. And we might find our mind is just drawn to the sensation in the body, whether it's that energetic felt sensation, kind of a pulsing, or observing where the edges and the boundary of the sensation is felt. It could be this open curiosity to how your body feels within any given posture, where you might feel compression and a stopping point within your body, so that you can really add that to your wheelhouse, and it can be an opportunity to know your limitations in your movement. We'll be here for about 1 more minute. So if you want to just release the shins and the feet to the floor, that's always available to you as well. It's like we just went through the life cycle of a frog here, right? Tadpole to frog to bullfrog. Just a few more breaths. And then slowly start to release the legs. If the shins and the feet are still lifted, you might wiggle the legs a little closer towards one another, lowering the chest and the head back towards the ground, and just place the arms and the head wherever it feels best for you here. Just a moment to rest. And so this will be the general pacing of our class. We'll take anywhere from 1 to several postures, and then have these moments of rest, whether it's on our backs or our bellies. These resonance postures are just an opportunity to either reflect upon our experience or to really luxuriate in the fact that there's an effortlessness here, and we can start to notice the effects that are felt from those previous postures. Observing lingering sensation, noting how our mind responds to it. All right, start to slide the palms underneath the shoulders. Press into the floor, start to rise back up to hands and knees, your tabletop position. And then from here, we'll start to bring some focus into the shoulders now. Coming into a posture called Anahatasana, heart-melting pose. It's also called puppy pose in the Yang yoga world. So we start with just the knees about underneath the hips and begin to walk the hands forward in space until we can start to feel our chest move towards the floor, and this might mean that the forearms release down towards the ground. And if you find that the head is not touching the earth, or if there's extreme discomfort within the shoulders, you might explore placing a prop underneath the forehead or the chest. You might explore changing the angle of the arms, perhaps bringing them closer together or wider apart. And if you find that there's too much downward pressure from the hips into the shoulders, you could explore sinking your hips back a bit in space. And so target areas in this posture include through the armpits. You could feel this perhaps into the deltoids. It might be felt within the upper, the middle, or the low back, perhaps across into the neck or the belly. And depending on the range of motion of your arms, could mean that if you don't feel much sensation, if you have further to go, you might place the forearms or the palms up onto blocks. You might even gaze towards the windows and rest your chin onto the floor if you feel that it could benefit for stimulation across the front of the throat. and if that feels accessible within your body. So this is a great posture to help stop this constant forward motion that we have within our upper back. We're just aiming to decrease that rounding that starts to become a bit more prevalent as we age, especially if we find ourselves always looking down at our devices. And we'll be here for about 30 more seconds, but if you feel like you're at your maximum amount of stress here, you could always shift your hips back towards your heels, bending your elbows and stacking your forehead on your palms to release. Okay, so if you're still in this Anahatasana, gently shift your weight forward so that your shoulders start to lift up and you're resting on your forearms, and then just start to walk your arms back towards the body, shift your hips back towards your heels, coming to rest in a child's pose. And you might stack your palms and rest the forehead. You might begin to curl your arms back behind you, just giving the shoulders a little bit of release from that posture. Okay, let's slowly start to rise back up to our hands and knees. And from here we'll come into our dragon. Just one variation today, aiming to bring a bit more sensation to the back leg. So getting across the top of either the hip flexor, perhaps feeling it more into the quadricep or the belly. So we'll start by stepping the right foot forward. And I like to bring my left hand or right hand a little bit closer to my left, and then stepping that right foot out really nice and wide. And this might require sending your left leg back a bit in space. So if there's discomfort on your knee, you could fold your mat if you don't have a blanket. And you might start to explore this either inside dragon or high flying dragon. If you have blocks, you might bring your hands to those blocks, unless having your hands on the floor is enough sensation for the front of the left leg. So just paying attention to how this feels within your body. And if you don't have blocks and you feel that you can hang out like this, you might just rest your arms on that front right knee. I feel that like that's a little precarious and I usually will tip over, but other additional target areas here could include that inner right thigh, the hamstring, perhaps the right outer hip. And if you're feeling compression at that bent knee side, you could always try heel toeing that right foot out a little wider or turning the toes out a bit. But again, we're just trying to bring a little bit more attention to the front of that left leg. And so when we come into these more sensation-rich postures, we really get a sense of how we respond to that intensity. And just noting if you can soften into it, whether it's in the face, the belly, or the mind. Okay, slowly start to shift the hips back, stepping your right foot back to your tabletop position. And let's come into a downward facing dog. So lifting your hips up and back. You might bring a little bit of movement into the hips, swaying them from side to side. Nice. And then for a moment, you might either rest in your child's pose or come to rest on the belly. So whichever you feel would be more restful for your body. And just observing if you feel any difference from the right or the left side. Slowly start to make your way back up to your hands and knees. And then we'll set up for our dragon on the other side. Just being aware that we might take the same setup or shift around a bit based on what we feel. So left hand comes a little closer to the right, stepping your left foot out nice and wide. And if you have blocks, perhaps placing your hands onto those blocks and just adjusting that back right leg so that you can feel more sensation across the top of the thigh. And that might mean that you don't have to shift it back very much. And perhaps exploring with the height of those blocks. Perhaps feeling sensation up into the belly. Less than a minute here. Curious, receptive, Cultivating that compassion within this posture. And compassion to the thoughts, to the body. Okay, and then slowly backing out, shifting the hips back, stepping that left foot back, and then again, just coming into that downward facing dog again. You might move a bit in your downward facing dog. Nice. Starting to really press those thighs back. Wonderful. And then either a moment to rest in your child's pose or down onto the belly, your choice. It might even feel better just to sit back on the heels in Vajrasana. And so pretty soon within our practice, I'll start to talk less and less. And I've really found great value in the quietude of this practice. An opportunity to continue to connect to the body, whether it's energetically or physically or emotionally. And to really connect to that cultivation of those intentions. Okay, so I know many of you have practiced with me before. So from this position, we're either going to make our way to saddle and just know that that isn't for everybody's body, or you can come into Sphinx where you prop up onto your forearms. So I am going to guide variations of our saddle pose before giving that option for Sphinx. So for some people, it feels better to sit back on the heels. And the knees could be closer together. They could be wider apart. Other options are to place a block between the heels or any support. That might feel better for the knees. Some amount of pressure on the knees is okay, but we never want too much pressure or that sharp sensation. If you find from there's really not much sensation, then you could start to explore leaning back in space. And again, the hips might be lifted on a prop. You might explore releasing your hips between the heels. And sometimes it's a matter of exploring the angle of the thighs here. Feet could be tucked, toes point back behind you, or you could have the ankles flexed and the toes pointing out and away. And then if you have props with you, you might release your forearms onto blocks instead. Or they might come underneath the spine so that there's a place for the spine to rest on if you find that coming back further just isn't appropriate for the front of the body. And so as we come further back, we might start to notice compression within the low back. And depending on how far back that you are, you might also start to reach your arms up and over the head. And so as you slowly explore that saddle, you might find this doesn't feel suitable for my ankles, my knees, you could just come into your Sphinx with the belly down, the thighs relaxed, and you're propped up onto your forearms. Any angle of the legs here, just aiming for some compression within the low back, whether you engage into the shoulders or release. And if you're in your Sphinx pose, you could always bring a block underneath the forehead. You could prop your forearms up onto blocks as well, just to increase the extension if that feels suitable. If you're in your saddle, you might explore tipping your head back a bit in space if you're on your forearms. And just noting what setup, what variation allows you to settle in here. Less than a minute. And so if you are in your saddle and you're down on the forearms, you can energetically start to push into those forearms so that you can lift up and then slowly begin to lean to one side to begin to release the legs. Some find it suitable in that leaning back position to just unthread the legs, and we'll slowly start to release onto our backs. If you're in your Sphinx, just lowering the upper body to the floor and beginning to flip yourself over onto your back. And just taking a moment to rest here. If you're feeling discomfort within the low back, you could have the knees bent, feet on the floor, knees coming in towards one another. And then just take a moment to feel yourself really completely let go of that posture. Okay, and then we'll start to further support the release from that back bend by beginning to make our way into thread the needle. So bending into the knees, placing the feet on the floor, and then just picking up your right foot and placing it onto the left thigh. So like a figure 4 in the yang yoga world. And so this might be suitable to stay just as is. Others might hug the left knee in towards the body, interlacing the hands around the left thigh or the shin. So Alex, switch the legs. Bring your left foot down and cross your right over, yeah, and then you can hug your left thigh in if that feels okay. And depending on the range of motion within this right leg in flexion and external rotation, it might feel more suitable just to cradle that whole right shin and thigh in towards the body with the hands instead. If you notice that the chin is tilting up too far towards the ceiling, you might place a blanket underneath the head just to alleviate any discomfort that might start to arise within the neck. About a minute left here. And then slowly start to release this shape and just letting the legs start to extend down to the bottom of your mat. You might just gently wiggle them from side to side a few times. Alright, and then we'll take this to the other side, so bending into the knees, picking up your left foot and crossing your left ankle onto the right thigh, and know that it might be perhaps resting more onto the shin, onto the thigh instead. So just noting how this side feels, really ensuring that there's no sharp sensation within the knee, just finding a suitable edge for that left outer hip. And that might mean that you stay just as is, with the right foot on the floor, or starting to hug that right leg in towards the body, or perhaps instead hugging this left leg in towards the body. You might prop your right foot up onto a block. This is a nice one to take at the wall, but it would be kind of hard to all do that right away. But if you're at home taking this at a later time, know that that's a nice option as well. About a minute left here. And then slowly starting to release this shape and straightening into the knees and just sending the heels towards the bottom of your mat. Alright, and then gathering your knees into the chest, let's roll over to one side and press up to a seated position. And then let's turn to face the right side of our mat, the long edge of our mat. Bring your hands back behind you. Take your feet to the floor, out at a generous distance away from one another. And then just slowly start to sway your legs over towards the right, creating a pinwheel-like shape. So your left thigh is coming in, right thigh is drawing out. All right. And then we're going to pick up our left hand and sweep it to the right, coming into a twisted deer. So we'll be facing towards the back of the room. And if you need to shift and adjust and you'd prefer your body to rest onto your mat, you could do so. Your forearms might start to release down towards the floor. You could explore walking that upper body into more of a twist here. The torso could rest down onto a bolster pillow instead, or forearms to blocks. And just be sure to adjust the angle between that left knee and the right foot. You could stack the knee on top of the foot, or let there be a space between them. Nice. So lots of different target areas within our twisted deer. You might be feeling sensation through that right outer hip or the top of the left thigh, maybe even into the quadricep. And then certainly experiencing this rotation within the spine, whether it's the side body or just the spinal column itself. And if you're resting on your forearms, it might be nice to bring a block underneath the head. As you continue to experience sensation within the body, thoughts entering the mind, you might continue to come back to that cultivation of how you might meet whatever is arising with more compassion, with kindness and that open curiosity. Or perhaps with that dedication if you have an additional one that you set today. Okay, slowly start to walk the elbows under the shoulders, press into the palms, straighten into the arms. Just gradually begin to return to face that long edge of your mat towards your upright deer. Bring your hands back behind you, sway your knees up through center, and it might just feel nice to sway your knees from side to side a few times. Then we'll take our twisted deer to the other side. So releasing your knees over towards the left, creating that pinwheel shape here. So right thigh spiraling inward, left thigh out. Adjusting the angle of the legs as needed. And then picking up that right hand, sweeping it over to the left, and just exploring this rotation in your spine on this side. And so as I mentioned before, we have variability within our skeletal structure, and that can even be included within the facets of the joints of our spine. One side might be a little bit longer than the other, and that can determine or range of motion within a twist. There might be also a lot of tension, resistance within all of that connective tissue between the rib cage and perhaps just becoming further aware of how interconnected our body is. Just simply through this awareness of little shifts within our body and how that translates and shows up within this web of fascia that surrounds the entire body. So even just a small injury or a buildup of tension in one specific area, that could translate further down the chain of this fascia. Perhaps showing up as residual pain, please slowly and mindfully begin to lift the torso, unwinding through the spine, returning towards that upright deer. Hands back behind you, lift the knees up through center, and just a few of those sways from side to side. And then from here, come to face the front of the room. You might elevate the hips a bit in space with a cushion or a folded blanket. From here, we're going to come into our caterpillar just to target the whole back chain of the body. And this might be felt along the backs of the legs, the backs of the knees, the backs of the hips, and even into the spine. So just bringing your legs out in front of you and just letting them flop however that they do. I find that my pelvis wants to tilt back in space, so it's helpful in my body to elevate my hips to encourage the pelvis to tilt forward. And as you pay attention to what you're feeling along this whole back chain of the body, you might stay as is for a moment, or you might start to explore just rounding and draping your upper body forward in space. So you might just rest your hands on your legs somewhere. You could frame your legs with blocks and just release the forearms onto blocks. You could build a little tower of those blocks between the legs to allow the forehead to rest here. And so just noticing along this chain where you feel sensation, whether it's along the legs, the back of the pelvis, the length of the spine, and somewhere within the head or the shoulders. Just resisting that urge to pull yourself forward, but really let gravity do the work. Just a few more breaths here. Just slowly and gradually starting to unfurl through the spine, bringing it to upright. And so you might pause here and bring your hands back behind you and just pulse through the knees. You could opt to windshield wiper the legs. You might lean into the hands, lifting the chest, or perhaps even coming into a reverse tabletop, just countering that forward fold with some sensation across the front of the chest. Nice. If you're lifted in that reverse table, lowering the hips back towards the floor. And then from here, we'll make our way onto our backs. I just ask that you turn around so that your heads are now facing towards the front of the room. And from our backs, we will be moving through one last posture before our Shavasana. So just taking a moment to ease your way down. And we'll be closing out with our Banana Asana. So targeting the side bodies. And the hips and the backs of the shoulders should be making a connection throughout the entirety of this posture. So we'll start with the right side, sliding the legs over to the left, and you might hook one ankle on top of the other. Whether it's the inside or the outside, doesn't really matter, it's just whatever feels best for you. And then pressing into the backs of the shoulders, shimmying the upper torso over to the left, and then lastly, you might reach your arms up alongside the head or take them into a Y, a T shape, or a cactus shape. If you have props, you might support underneath the shoulders or the arms. And if you notice the arms and the shoulders causing any nerve entrapment, say sensing numbness or tingling within one or both of the arms, I would suggest just simply releasing that arm back by your side or changing the angle or the alignment so that that sensation isn't felt anymore. And so this might be felt through the shoulder, the rib cages, the side waist, the whole outer line of the leg. And slowly releasing your arms back by the side body, shifting the upper body and sliding the legs through center. And so you might pause in this Shavasana-like posture. It may feel better in your body to hug the knees into the chest for a moment and sway a little bit from side to side. And then we'll take it to the other side, so legs long down the mat, sliding them over towards the right this time. Shimmying the shoulders and the head over towards the right, and then lastly, perhaps lifting those arms up alongside the head or out to a wider degree. And just noticing sensation somewhere along that left side body. slowly start to make your way out of Banana Asana on this side. And if it felt useful and helpful to hug the knees for a moment, just doing so before you begin to shift into your Shavasana. You might just take a little extra time to gather props, to support under the body anyway. In just a moment in one of the most yin postures of all. And sensing that connection to the support beneath you. And consciously relaxing through legs, the torso and the arms. And just like we began, tuning in and observing how we feel physically, energetically, or emotionally. And really practicing letting be whatever is there. And then the softening to what is. You might sense peace washing through the body, through the mind, and through the heart. And feel your body resting here. And take a few deep breaths as you begin to reawaken. And when you feel ready, just starting to move back into the hands and the feet. And drawing the knees into the chest and rolling over to one side. And just taking a few breaths, resting on your side. And then pressing up to a seated position. Eyes could be closed or just a softer gaze. And taking a moment to rest your hands at heart center and bowing chin to chest. With each breath you take, may you be happy. On the path that you walk, may you be safe and protected. And with the unknown ahead, may you be at ease in the life you lead. May you be at peace. Samvari. I thank you all so much for your time and for your practice. Namaste. Thanks, everyone. All right, last yoga hike of the season is this Friday. We're meeting at Blue Job at 5 o'clock. And we are adding some classes to the schedule as well. So Wednesdays at 6:30 a.m. we're going to be adding a gently heated power class. Wednesdays at 4:30 we'll have a hour-long yin practice. And then Thursdays at 4:30 we're also adding an hour gentle practice as well. And if you have any suggestions for other classes, we're always open to it too. It starts this week, yeah, for October. If you, what's that? I am. If you used any borrowed props, just spray them on all sides except for the blanket and just leave it off to the side and I'll put it away once it's all dried. All right, thanks everybody. Oh yeah, yeah, we're just adding more classes. Yeah, definitely. Ooh.